anak na siguro, mga apo na tong mga first generation. Because they were free from the Assyrian interference. Yung Assyria is a powerful nation at the time. And they are like conquering nations and after nations. At that time, they were freed from that. So walang disturbo. And so they prospered, these Israelites. And because of that, again, another generation sa mga Israelites, there's an emergence of wealthy upper class. So, parang tayo, no? Meron tayong mga ninuno na who were close to the scripture and then nagkaanak, may mga apo. And then along the way, hindi na naituro yung salita ng Diyos. So, there's a gap there. So, this emergence of wealthy upper class, ito na yung ina-address ni Micah. Because what happened during that time, because of they're free from the interference from the Assyrian countries, there was like great corruption happening. And ito na yung categories ng mga sins. So we have an idea. Number 1, idolatry. Imagine, idolatry. Seizure of properties. Failure of civil leadership. So they have their government, but again, corruption came in. Religious leadership, even the leaders in the spiritual realms, mga religious leaders nila, the prophetic leadership. Personal sacrifice. In exchange of divine justice. I think part of the Micah previous to that, a couple of verses before that, yung sabi na, what should we bring, Lord? Like ram sacrifices, burnt offerings, in exchange. So they like to bribe God. I'll do this sin, Lord, I'll just pay up later. So all these things, and then there's corrupt business practices and violence. All these things were happening during that time. So that's the context. And our God is a holy God. He doesn't change. He'll always be holy. And if there's sin, He will deal with it. Like all of us, if we live in sin, God, because He loves you, like a father, He will discipline. So medyo seryoso talaga tong part na to. But I will not dwell on the three, I would say, sections of the verse. I'll dwell on the last part. Because I was thinking maybe sa huli na ako, yung tip na lang ng i-expound ko. The part where we were commanded to walk humbly before the Lord. Alright, now I'll dive in. Walk humbly before the Lord. So I think, hopefully you can feel the anger of God. After showing them His greatness, ito yung binalik ng mga tao. And mind you, it can happen to us. Okay? So, walk humbly with God. I'd like to park on that short phrase, walk with God. What does it mean, walk with God? Okay, now I'll need your help. Yung sa Genesis 6:9. Let's try to look at ano ba yung mga examples, mga men of faith that they use that phrase, walk with God. So Genesis 6:9. I need volunteer. Sorry? Yeah. I think that's Noah, the example of Noah.
This is Genesis 6:9. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God.
Thank you, Sam. Noah walked with God. So alam naman natin si Noah during the time of flood, right? May idea tayo about that. He was called a man of God. He's righteous, he's blameless. And the context of that, when God called Noah, it was in the midst of corruption, wickedness. Kaya gusto nga niyang to wipe out the world because of corruption. So Noah walked with God. And there's another one, I'll try to skip, but I just mentioned Enoch. He also walked with God. So the idea here is walking with God means, I try to dig deeper on the word used. It's something to do with a relationship with God. Not just a relationship, but intimate, ongoing intimacy with God. So Noah, Enoch, they walked with God. Question, are we walking intimately with God? Do we have a close, personal, intimate relationship with God? First question. And to add, the verse says, walk humbly with God. So these people, the Israelites, they probably are walking with God. They're doing their religious rituals. They still offer sacrifices. Externally doing the requirements, the covenant, to show their faithfulness to God. But like Brother Adel mentioned, sometimes wala na emotions, or so he's implying there that just going through the motions of Christianity. Sunday, Bible study, devotions, nagiging mechanical, probably. It's possible, right? We go through our busy schedules and we forget that you are in a relationship with a God who likes to talk to you personally. He longs for intimacy. So walking with God, the idea of ongoing intimacy with God. And I think we can relate, just very important yung personal intimacy with God, because God cannot use you, or God cannot reveal Himself to you in powerful ways if we treat Him like a distant God. He is personal. He does not live in a building. Now, one Sunday morning we go there and then off we go. We forget Him and we do our usual things. Right? Living, walking with God. And how? Humbly. So now, I'll try to, I guess, make this more practical. Ano yung mga, how does it reveal when we are walking humbly with God? As a study, like I was looking at the life of Noah and Abraham, and out of this came three, I would say, a life that reflects when you are walking humbly with God. Number one is the dreaded S word. What's the S word? That's 1, 2. And there's one for the Christians. Yes.
Is this from Pastor Walter?
Okay, you're exempted. I'll answer. It's the word submission. Okay, here we go. Submission. How does it reflect when you're walking with God? Humbly walking with God? Submission. Okay, what's the idea about submission? There's somebody's in control and you are yielding. You are putting yourself like a subordinate. Okay, so there's an idea that there's somewhere higher than you, wiser than you, greater than you, and you are the subordinate. So you have to submit. And of course, in our case, who is our superior? God. He is our creator. In Genesis, God created us after His own image. So we cannot live our lives independently. Now, okay, young people, hindi naman ako against you, right? Nakadaan din ako nan. We all, lahat kami dito, we go through a certain phase in our lives when we want to say, I want to be independent. Longing for that time when I can do my own thing. And mind you, not only for teenagers, sa mga adults, meron yan. It shows in different forms, very subtle. Right? So workplace, okay? Ayoko nang mag-dive kasi baka, tama na. Alright, we're just warming up actually. So, but before I dive into a little more the practical application, so there's two components actually when you say submission. Oftentimes you only think about, when you submit, you yield. Okay? You yield. But there's another component that we often forget. When you submit, you just not yield. You also, the opposite side, resist. So parang paradox. You say you yield and then you resist. What do I mean by that? So let's start with yielding. When you submit, it means you're yielding. So practical analogy would be, sino may driver's license dito? The-drive na. Karamihan sa atin may driver. Merong sa driving test, may mga yield. What happens if you're supposed to yield, but you don't yield? And then merong another vehicle, they have the right of way, and you don't yield, what happens? Crash, collision. Okay? In life, there are principles. In scriptures, in a Christian walk with God, the principle of yielding is very important. If we don't yield, clash. That's why there's friction in marriages, in churches, in personal relationships. Okay? That's reality. Yield. Okay pa? Palalim tayo ng palalim. Medyo may kirot na yun. Tama na. Well, I'm saying these things because it's happening in my life. That's happened in my life. It's an ongoing battle, by the way. When you submit, it's not a one-time thing. Submit na ako nito, the following week, wala na. I have graduated with that submission. No,